Neto was the kind of girl who could light up a room with just her presence. At 12 years old, she had the innocence of childhood mixed with a growing understanding of the world around her. Her bright eyes, full of curiosity, often reflected the warmth of her mother's love before everything changed. For as long as Neto could remember, it had always been just her and her mother, Yuzo. Life had not been easy, but it had been theirs. They shared laughter, love, and dreams. Yuzo worked tirelessly as a seamstress, sewing clothes deep into the night just to make ends meet. But no matter how hard things got, she made sure Neto felt safe, protected, and cherished. Yuzo had been heartbroken and desperate. Neto's father had abandoned them years ago, leaving her to fend for herself and her daughter. Society whispered behind her back, labeling her a woman who couldn't keep her home. She feared being alone. So when Jide came along, charming, well-dressed, and generous, he felt like the answer to her prayers. Jide knew exactly what to say. He showered Yuzo with attention, bringing her gifts, taking her out to fancy places she had only dreamed of. For the first time in years, she felt seen, desired. But what really won her over was how Jide treated Neto, at least in the beginning. He brought her chocolates, toys, and even helped her with school assignments. Neto, however, never felt at ease around him. She could not explain it, but there was something about Jide that made her skin crawl. He smiled too much, held her hand too long, and sometimes, his gaze lingered in a way that made her feel naked. But how could she tell her mother, Yuzo was finally happy? Then, the first assault happened. It was late at night when Neto woke up to find Jide standing at her bedroom door. The dim light from the corridor cast a shadow over his face, but she could still see his expression, hungry, dangerous. She wanted to scream, but fear paralyzed her. Jide walked in, placed a hand over her mouth, and whispered, "SHH. Be a good girl." The next morning, Neto felt different. The pain was one thing, but the shame was unbearable. She walked through the house like a ghost, unable to look her mother in the eyes. But she had to tell her. She had to. That evening, when Jide left for work, Neto gathered the courage to speak. She found her mother sewing in the corner of their tiny living room. "Mama, I need to tell you something." Yuzo looked up, smiling. "What is it, my baby?" Neto hesitated. "It's about Jide. He came into my room last night." Yuzo's smile faded slightly. "Okay. He touched me, Mama. He hurt me." For a moment, there was silence. Yuzo blinked, her hands frozen over the fabric she was sewing. Then, she let out a nervous chuckle. "Oh, Neto, don't be silly. Jide loves you. He would never do such a thing." Neto felt a lump rise in her throat. "But Mama, I'm telling the truth." Yuzo's expression hardened. "You must have misunderstood something. Maybe you were dreaming." Neto shook her head violently. "No, Mama. He came into my room. He touched me." The slap came so fast that Neto didn't see it coming. She gasped, holding her cheek, her skin stinging from the blow. Her mother stood before her, eyes wide with fear and desperation. "Don't ever say such a thing again." Yuzo hissed, her voice low and trembling. "Do you want to destroy this home? Do you want people to laugh at me? Jide is taking care of us." Tears welled in Neto's eyes. "But Mama, enough." Yuzo cut her off, turning her back. "Go to your room. And don't ever bring this up again." Neto stood frozen, staring at the woman who was supposed to protect her. A mother's love should be unconditional. A mother should fight for her child, but Yuzo had chosen Jide that night, Neto lay in bed, her body aching, her heart shattered. She listened to the distant sound of laughter coming from the sitting room, her mother and Jide, together, as if nothing had happened. She was alone, and the nightmare was only beginning. Neto was never the same after that night. The once cheerful girl who loved school, who laughed easily, became silent and withdrawn. She barely spoke. She barely smiled. Her grades began to slip. Nightmares haunted her sleep every night. She lay awake, terrified of when Jide would come again, and he did again and again. Jide was careful. He had mastered the art of manipulation. In public, he was the perfect man, helpful, generous, a provider. He had charmed the neighbors, the school security, even Yuzo. Whenever questions arose, he dismissed them with ease. Yuzo, though oblivious on the surface, had begun to break internally. Deep down, she knew what was happening to her daughter. But acknowledging it meant admitting her own failure as a mother, and so, she drowned her guilt in bottles of gin. She started drinking more frequently, staying up late into the night. When Neto returned home one evening, she found her mother sitting on the couch, an empty bottle beside her. "Where have you been?" Yuzo slurred. "School." Yuzo squinted at her. "You're lying." Neto sighed, exhaustion weighing her down. "Mama, please. I need you to listen to me." But Yuzo had already drifted into unconsciousness. Jide, sensing Yuzo's weakened state, became more reckless. He no longer cared to hide his actions. Neto could barely sleep, afraid of when he would come for her next point. One night, when Yuzo was deep in her drunken slumber, Jide stormed into Neto's room. The terror in her eyes fueled his wicked pleasure. "You think anyone will believe you?" he sneered. "Your own mother chooses me over you." It was at that moment Neto made a decision. She had to leave. If she stayed, she wouldn't survive, but leaving meant abandoning her mother. Could she do that? Could she escape and leave Yuzo at the mercy of a monster? The guilt weighed on her, but so did the unbearable pain of staying. She had to make a choice. The walls of her home were closing in. The whispers of her suffering were growing louder. And the wounds, both seen and unseen, were becoming too much to bear. Would she risk running away, or would she find another way to fight back? The weight of years of suffering finally took its toll on Neto. One morning, as she prepared to leave for school, dizziness overwhelmed her. The room spun, her legs wobbled beneath her, and before she could call out for help, darkness consumed her. She collapsed onto the floor with a dull thud. A scream pierced the air. Yuzo's neighbors rushed in, their voices frantic. Some fetched water, others fanned her, but Neto remained unresponsive. "It's not just hunger," Mama Nkechi, a plump woman with a sharp tongue, muttered. "This child is sick. She needs a hospital." Yuzo hesitated, her mind racing. What if the doctor found out the truth? What if the hospital involved the police? But under the accusing stares of the neighbors, she had no choice. At the hospital, doctors and nurses scrambled to stabilize Neto. After several tests, a doctor approached Yuzo, his expression grim. "Madam," he said, lowering his voice, "your daughter is suffering from severe stress, malnutrition, and physical trauma. There are signs that she has been repeatedly violated." Yuzo's body stiffened. She glanced at the nurse standing nearby, whose sympathetic eyes only deepened her shame. I don't understand what you're saying, doctor," she stammered. The doctor's expression turned sharper. "Madam, the child has endured prolonged abuse. Are you telling me you had no idea?" Yuzo's lips trembled. She wanted to lie, to feign shock, but guilt clawed at her throat. "Please, doctor," she whispered. "Don't report this. I will take care of her." The doctor's face darkened with disgust. "You should be ashamed." But he had no choice. Neto was a minor, and by law, he was required to inform the authorities. As Yuzo stood there, trembling, she did not realize that this was the moment everything would begin to unravel. When Neto woke up and saw where she was, tears streamed down her face. She knew, deep down, that the doctor had discovered the truth. She turned to her mother, her voice hollow. "Did you finally tell them?" Yuzo looked away. "I begged him not to report it." Neto recoiled as if she had been slapped. "You still want to protect him," she spat. "After everything he's done to me." Yuzo sobbed, but Neto had no sympathy left for her. "You are not my mother," she whispered coldly. "A real mother would have fought for me." That night, Neto lay awake in her hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. She no longer had hope, not in her mother, not in anyone, but something inside her shifted. She was done being a victim, done being silent. Back at home, Jide sensed that his time was running out. He had always controlled the narrative, keeping Neto quiet through fear and keeping Yuzo too dependent on him to act. But now, the girl was in a hospital, and doctors had a way of talking. He decided he had to get rid of her permanently. That night, he packed a small bag and, under the pretense of arranging a better life for Neto, he planned to take her out of town. But fate had other plans. A group of elders had gotten wind of the situation from the hospital staff. They confronted Yuzo, demanding the truth. Under pressure, she broke down and confessed everything. The news spread like wildfire through the community. By the time Jide arrived at the hospital, ready to take Neto away, he was met with a furious mob. "Where do you think you're going, Jide?" Mama Nkechi's voice rang out. "We know what you've done." Jide's face paled. He turned to Yuzo, silently pleading with her, but she looked away. She had finally lost the last shred of protection she once gave him. The police arrived shortly after, summoned by the community leaders. Jide was arrested on the spot, but the officers turned to Yuzo as well. "You knew about this, and you let it happen," one officer said. "You are an accomplice." Yuzo fell to her knees. "Please, I was scared. I didn't know what to do." But no excuse was enough. The storm had finally broken, and now, she had to face the consequences of her silence. Meanwhile, Neto watched it all from her hospital window, emotionless. She had lost everything, but perhaps, for the first time, she had also gained something: freedom. The weight of silence had become unbearable. Yuzo had spent years trapped in the web of lies she had woven for herself, denying the truth to avoid losing Jide, to escape the shame, to convince herself that she was still in control. But as she sat on the hospital bench, watching Neto curled up on the bed with amphor drip in her arm, the reality finally hit her like a wave crashing against a fragile wall. She had failed her daughter. And worse, she had allowed it to happen. The murmurs of the hospital staff in the hallway filled the room like whispers of ghosts from her past. The doctor's stern eyes had spoken volumes even before his words came. "Madam Yuzo, you cannot hide this any longer," he had said. The guilt was suffocating, and in that moment, Yuzo made the decision that changed everything. The police arrived at their house that evening. Yuzo had reported Jide while he was at work, giving them all the details they needed. But Jide was smart. He had sensed something was off when Yuzo refused to meet his gaze that morning. As soon as he saw the police vehicles approach, he bolted through the back door. What he didn't expect was the entire community waiting for him outside. Women, elders, and young men who had once greeted him with respect now looked at him with nothing but disgust and rage. The rumors had spread fast after the hospital visit. Nito's teacher had connected the dots, and when the police confirmed the allegations, it was clear that Jide was a monster hiding behind the mask of a provider. He ran, shoving past the crowd, but the young men caught up to him. They dragged him back, shouting insults and curses, until the police handcuffed him and threw him into the van. His screams echoed through the night, but for the first time in years, the one directed at Neto. Justice had begun. The trial was long and painful. Neto had to recount everything, reliving her darkest memories. As she testified, Yuzo was there every step of the way, her once bright eyes now filled with regret and sadness. She wanted to hold Neto, to tell her she was sorry 1,000 times over, but Neto was distant. "How do I trust you again, Mama?" Neto whispered one evening. "You let it happen." Yuzo's heart shattered. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "But I will never stop trying to make it right." They lived in a women's shelter for a while, away from the prying eyes of their old neighborhood. Yuzo found work at a catering service, slowly rebuilding her independence. Neto, on the other hand, struggled with nightmares and anxiety. Therapy helped, but healing was slow. Still, there was something stronger than pain, resilience. Months turned into a year. Neto, now stronger and more determined, started volunteering at a local youth center. She met other girls who had suffered in silence, just as she had. She listened to their stories, held their hands through their fears, and told them the truth she wished someone had told her sooner. "You are not alone. You are not to blame. And you can fight back." She became a beacon of hope for others, sharing her story openly. The scars Jide left on her would never fully disappear, but they no longer defined her. Jide was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The judge made it clear his crimes were unforgivable. Yuzo stood beside Neto as the verdict was read. Tears streamed down her face, not just for the justice served, but for the years she had lost trying to hold onto a lie. As they stepped out of the courthouse, the sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold. Neto turned to her mother, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled. "I think we are going to be okay," she said. Yuzo nodded, holding on to the hope that they could rebuild what was broken, and with that, they walked forward, leaving the past behind, stepping into a future they would create together, one built on truth, love, and unbreakable strength. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for more stories like this.